Oh, hello, special group of friends, Hannah, etc. I've been asked to give a little bit of a kind of quick overview of the Iliad and just maybe sort of help you all as you sort of dive in here. Full disclosure, I am not a college professor. I teach high school, but I have spent the better part of 30 years low-key obsessed with Homer and the Greeks and all of that. I typically teach the Odyssey, but it's such an exciting opportunity to talk to you about Homer's Iliad. So here goes. And I'm giving you all an opportunity. You can make comments in, below here on the video, and I'll do my best to answer those as best as I can. Like I said, this is not going to be exhaustive. I think it's fairly reputable information that I'm sharing with you. But as always, please defer to your professors. They're the ones getting paid for this. So, all right. Well, Homer, of course, as many of you know, is kind of the granddaddy of them all. He's the original epic poet. Every epic poet since his work have sort of understood that they're working in his wake. So he's kind of a big deal, such a big deal that Plato and Aristotle are positively obsessed with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So with that kind of fan base, you can expect that you all are in for quite a ride here. But that being said, it's a little bit difficult to experience Homer without doing a little work for yourself and kind of learning to tune your ear to hear and focus your eyes to see what is in front of you, because it's written in a kind of formal idiom of epic poetry that many of us are not accustomed to. Most of us, if we read novels, short stories, those kinds of things, which are by their very nature informal, personal, and intimate. But an epic story has a kind of formal quality to it that requires we moderns to, kind of recalibrate our sense-making apparatus. But Homer is a big deal. In fact, I believe it's Plato who calls him the educator of the Greeks. And so I think you can understand him in similar fashion to the way that Jews and Christians understand Moses. Moses is the traditional drafter of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and he is a kind of poet shepherd figure, and famously, of course, leads the Israelites out of captivity. But Moses sort of enjoys this position of being the great articulator of the Jewish peoples. And I think, and I don't think this is too much of a stretch to say that the Greeks, as we understand them, the Athenians and the Spartans, et cetera, understand Homer as sort of the first person to capture, their story. And their story functions the way that the scriptures function for the Jews and scripture functions for Christians. And so I don't think it's an overstatement to see that the Greeks first become Greeks through the retelling of Homer's great epic cycle. Of course, the Iliad, and then the sequel of sorts with the Odyssey. So Homer is kind of a big deal. So don't be afraid to make some mistakes and figure some things out on your own. It's worth your time. It's something that it's a work that I return to often, especially as this sort of opening figure of Achilles. And because I can't help myself, because I'm a teacher, I'm going to read the introduction, the prologue, the famous prologue. And I think I'm using the same translation as you all are reading. It's the Richmond Lattimore. And so it starts, "Sing, goddess, the anger of Peleus's son Achilles and its devastation, which put pains thousandfold upon the Achaeans." Side note, you will never see in the Iliad a reference to the Greeks. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but they're called throughout here the Achaeans because they're all from the same peninsula. "Hurled in their multitudes to the house of Hades, the underworld, strong souls of heroes, but gave their bodies to be the delicate feasting of dogs, of all birds, and the will of Zeus was accomplished since that time when first there stood in division of conflict Atreus' son, the lord of men, Agamemnon, and brilliant Achilles. And so the, you know, that opening paragraph is always super important because it kind of sets the stage, but it's sort of focusing here. He's telling us what the story is about, and it's going to be about the rage or the wrath of Achilles. And so that's what we have to kind of deal with. And um, of note here, before we dive into book one, again, just quickly, this is a cursory hop, skip, and jump through. I'm going to try to get to book 10 if I have enough time here. But what we have to understand is that the Greeks and the Trojans are operating in what we might call an honor culture. We do not operate in an honor culture. We operate in a culture that is, in theory, organized around the rule of law. And so it's a little bit different. It takes a little bit getting used to. So what we see here in this opening stanza is not only is it about Achilles' anger, but it is about this central beef between Agamemnon, who is the sort of the commander of the Achaean army, and Peleus's son Achilles. And Achilles is, the great warrior. Everybody knows that Achilles is the best. And of course, the Greeks are obsessed with excellence, with the best. And so you have a figure in Achilles, and he's the best. And it's be kind of like the best player on the team. And so how do you handle the best player on your team if you are the leader of the team, right? Maybe you're a captain of the team. And so that's what it is on paper. But everybody kind of knows that even you, the captain, are not the best, that it's some other guy who is on the starting roster. And so we're kind of dealing with ego. You might say, hey, well, why don't you just sort of put your ego aside and let it go? That's just not going to make any kind of sense to these heroes. And remember, the heroes are not normal people. They are the special, the set aside. You might even say they're the sacred among the mere human hoi polloi. And so they, because of their excellence, because of their status as a hero, because they are the ones that are willing to put skin in the game and risk even their lives to achieve the agreed upon outcome, they have certain privilege that runs counter to the way that we see the world. So, for instance, here in the beginning, we see that there's a problem that Croesus, who's a priest from Troy, wants his daughter back. His daughter, Chryseis, which is a little bit confusing. Croesus is the priest, but Chryseis is his daughter. She has been captured as part of, what happens in the ebbs and flows of battle. And so she has been given as a war prize to Agamemnon. And Croesus is a priest who is frustrated by this fact. So he calls upon Apollo, the god, to have a plague descend upon the gathered Achaeans. And so a plague does, in fact, fall upon the Achaeans, and it lasts for the better part of 10 days. And finally, Achilles, sensing that they have, for whatever reason, fallen into disfavor with the gods, that he's going to sort of call an assembly and talk about what's wrong. Now, why can't Achilles call an assembly? Well, if you're familiar at all with Greek stories, the power to call an assembly is typically reserved for the leader. And you can just think about that physically, like you assemble, you put together a group of people. Now, who should have the right to do that? Agamemnon, of course, he's the commander of the armies. But Achilles is kind of exercising his kind of privilege due to the fact that he's the best of the best, that he's going to sort of skip this Agamemnon business because he kind of halfway thinks that Agamemnon is not up to the task here. And so he calls an assembly, and this ticks off Agamemnon, to say the least. And it comes out that the gods are wanting Chryseis to be returned, and Agamemnon's, well, I don't want to give away my war prize. And then Achilles is like, well, you have to, bud, like do this thing. And so Agamemnon's like, oh, so you're going to challenge my authority? Fine. Then I'm going to give her back and I'm going to take somebody else's prize. And whose prize does he decide to take? Achilles, right? Achilles is, we might say butthurt about the situation, but but for good reason. Again, if you're thinking about it in terms of the way that the social hierarchy is established in the Greek setting, in this honor culture, the Achilles deserves the best prize because he brings the most to bear on the war effort. And so Agamemnon is in a sort of fit of petulance because his authority has been questioned. He's going like, oh yeah, well, I'm going to double down. I'm going to show you. And so you have this kind of battle of wills between the commander and his all-star player. And this is a very properly frustrating to Achilles, even if you feel like it's a little bit much. It's not in the context of this story. So Achilles, super frustrated, and you will see that Achilles is a very passionate, non-stoic kind of person. Don't let that fool you. That was very much sort of how a Greek hero was to be. We have a sense of sort of being a buttoned up stoic figure, but that's just really not the way things work there. So don't let your own biases make you dislike Achilles. So Achilles is upset and he decides to ask his mother, and she's this half goddess figure. Actually, she's not. She's a nymph, one of the lower gods. And he asks his mom for help to pray to Zeus to make the rest of the Achaeans miss him. In other words, start to lose in the battles because Achilles has decided to take his ball and go home, as it were. But he asks his mom to talk to Zeus about the situation. She promises to do this. And then Odysseus, and we all remember who Odysseus was. Odysseus, the wily trickster figure, is commissioned by Agamemnon to bring Chryseis back to her father, the priest Croesus. And Croesus then lifts the plague. And there we go. So in book 2, that trickster Zeus sends Agamemnon a false dream. And so he decides, based upon this, of course, he doesn't think it's false, he thinks it's real, basically inspires him to gather the troops and go back into battle. Agamemnon, as he gathers his men, he arms his men, he says, hey, let's go home. But what he's doing there is he's trying to play with them emotionally. You know, it'd be like a coach calling everybody into a huddle and be like, you know what, guys, let's just, we should probably just quit. You guys clearly don't look like you want to play here. So, let's just go home. And so all the guys are like, sweet, let's go home, which is not what Agamemnon is wanting to have happen. But so then Odysseus and Athena are like, no, guys, let's not do that. Let's go back into battle here. That's kind of the important thing. And then Thersites challenges Agamemnon. Again, you have these sort of patterns of people challenging Agamemnon and going along with Agamemnon. So pay attention to the people that challenge him. And he challenges them. And then Agamemnon says, go back to your room, you little punk, and let's arm for war. And so then at the end of book 2 is the famous but somewhat boring, admittedly, catalog of all of the armies of the Greek city-states that will be part of this large army commanded by Agamemnon. So in book 3, we have such a fascinating sort of change of perspective. So always ask yourself at the beginning of a book, where are we? Are we on the battlefield? Are we in the Greek camp? Are we in the Trojan camp? Or are we in the Greek walls? Who's about? And so here we have, what we're going to have a sort of a scene shift. And we see this character Helen and this character Paris. Now, time out here quickly on Helen. Helen, of course, is the famous Helen of Troy. She's the face that launches 1,000 ships, the 1,000 ships that we just read about at the end of book 2. And she is herself a kind of famous and mythic character. Helen is Zeus's daughter, but she's raised by the king of Sparta as if she is her own. Helen and Castor, Clytemnestra, and Pollux. And so Helen and Clytemnestra are, we might consider them half sisters, but they're considered to be sisters. Helen marries Menelaus, and Clytemnestra, the sister, marries Agamemnon. So you've got 2 sisters married to 2 brothers. And so the conceit of this whole thing is that Helen has run off with Helen married to Menelaus, one of the princes of Mycenae, but Spartan, we'll just say. Helen runs off or is taken, it's unclear, by this prince of Troy. This prince of Troy named Paris has gone on a kind of ambassadorial mission. He sees Helen, and this is how it always works. Helen is stunningly beautiful and sort of, overcomes Paris. Paris takes her / runs away with her back to Troy. And so Menelaus is like, hey, I need revenge. And so Agamemnon, the brother, says, okay, I will gather this army and we'll do it. So that's kind of part of the backdrop. Helen is stunningly beautiful, and she seems to have this magic-like effect on everybody that she sees, which is an indication, of course, for the Greeks that she's probably at least partially divine. And so you have all of these semi-divine creatures. And so if you can think about it, like all the normal people are here, right? And then you've got the heroes up here, and you have these strange characters lifted from the heroic class that are kind of so amazing that they must be part divine. And then above those semi-divine creatures, you have the lower order of gods, the middle order of gods, and then finally the Olympian order of gods on the very top. And so there's this interesting hierarchy. And so where the gods and the humans meet are these special figures, these semi-divine figures. Those are the heroes, as well as a figure like Helen of Troy. She seems to have this magical, godlike quality over the mere mortals. Right. I don't want to get too much in the weeds here. I feel like I already have. We're 16 and a half, almost 17 minutes into this video, so I kind of want to make this short. I promised Hannah I would do around 20 minutes. But we have sort of the book 4, people call it the breaking of oaths, and he's trying to Agamemnon was trying to rally the troops. And then we have this thing called, in book 5, the Aristeia of Diomedes. And the Aristeia is this showcase of excellence. If you think of like a musical, right? You've got the main couple of characters in a musical, and they have a bunch of songs on stage, but then each of the other characters has this moment that they get to sing the song. Well, in that moment in which those people get showcased, we might call it the Aristeia of each of these characters. So in book 5, we have this showcase of excellence, this kind of solo of Diomedes, one of the Achaean/Greek warriors. And I want you to pay attention to these lead-up Aristeias, these lead-up showcases for these more minor characters, because Homer is kind of whetting our appetite for when are we going to see Hector's Aristeia, the main guy on the Trojan side. When are we going to see Achilles' Aristeia? And that really is where we're headed toward in the second half of this epic, right? But these little mini Aristeia, and I think the word comes from excellence, aristoi, that sense of excellence, our word for aristocracy, right? So this is the showcase of Diomedes' excellence. Now, book 6 rolls around, and we have this incredible domestic scene between Hector and his wife and son Andromache. I highly recommend spending some extra time on this sequence. It really humanizes this whole effort, because with the Greeks, of course, they're all away from their homes, but the Trojans are fighting right outside of the walls of their own home. And so we get this this amazing sequence between Hector and his wife Andromache, and his son. What is his son's name again? Oh gosh, I don't remember the son's name. But it's really kind of cute. He kind of cries when he sees his father come in, because he's in his ferocious war gear. But I cannot remember his son's name off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find it real quick. I'm so sorry. I don't have it on the ready, but you'll see it when it comes. But again, this sort of really humanizes and shows you the stakes of this battle, because of the Trojans. And so I want you to pay attention here too, because Homer is clearly a Greek. I mean, he's writing from the vantage point of being a Greek and making the Greeks, but he so humanizes the enemy. And I think that's part of the enduring power of this epic, that, they find themselves on opposite sides of the gods, so to speak. And we mortals are the mere playthings of the gods' will, and most importantly, Zeus's will. And so there's always a kind of tragic component to being a human being in the Greek imaginary. It's always a little bit tragic. Then in book 7, we get a showdown between Hector, the great Greek leader of the Greek army, of the Trojan army, between Hector and Aias. Now, you may have heard of this guy as Ajax. Sometimes in English it's Ajax, but Lattimore keeps the I and the J the same, so it's Aias. Fine. Anyway, great battle, and it's such an amazing battle that they call it off at the end of the day, and they agree to, they fight to a standoff, so they agree to sort of pause. They can take their dead and offer proper burial, which becomes a major theme in the very last 3 books, 22, 23, and 24. But we see here in book 8, Hector fight then the next day against Nestor. And you might remember Nestor from the Odyssey if you've read the Odyssey. And so again, we see this sort of amazing hand-to-hand combat with these Greek warriors and these Trojan warriors. And it's a very intimate, almost liturgical kind of dance between these men, though clearly this is not a mere dance. This is a kind of liturgy of death, which is part of the horror of war. So I want you to just sort of focus on the intimacy and the violence. It's not indiscriminate. It's always personal. And therefore, the Greeks take this idea very, very seriously. And finally, in book 9, the Greeks decide, we are not going to win this without Achilles. So they send Odysseus to talk to Achilles. And Achilles is like, oh, so how does this taste when I'm not part of the effort? Tastes pretty bad, right? Well, suck it. And that's kind of the end of it. And then, so I'll stop it right there. I'll get to book 9. You all can take care of book 10 yourselves, because I want to, again, mindful of time here. So a couple of things. Honor and excellence are paramount virtues amongst the Greeks. And so remember that. We, who live in the sort of the Christian and post-Christian West, do not have the same kind of moral code in quite the same way. So I think Achilles might come across as initially kind of petulant. Don't do that too much. Achilles truly is excellent, especially in the context of this world. I want you to pay attention to the patterns, and patterns will then offer us a mechanism to anticipate and see the next iteration. And so you're going to see these patterns of Aristeia. And as I said earlier, these patterns of Aristeia are going to anticipate the great revelation of this God-man Achilles and his excellence. Because that's what this whole thing about. It's really about the revelation of Achilles. And Achilles and Thetis are part of a prophecy. Zeus, it has been prophesied that the daughter of Thetis would overthrow Zeus. So Zeus, not wanting to be overthrown, convinces Thetis to mate with a human so that Achilles cannot kill Zeus. So then part of what Zeus owes to Achilles is his glory. Just kind of put that out there. And so we're going to end just before we see the Aristeia of Agamemnon. So Agamemnon, he's been kind of the bad guy so far, but we have to recognize that even though he's not the best manager of men, he's not the best leader of men, he himself is excellent. And so we're going to see that very shortly in it's either book 10 or book 11, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I think it's in book 10. So pay attention. Each of these books will showcase the kind of excellence of a man. So there it is. That's kind of the introduction to Homer. Remember that this was originally an oral poem, and so somebody would get in front of the great assemblage and recite the poem by memory. So we get to read it, thank goodness. We don't have to memorize the whole thing, but it is kind of has this oral cadence to it. And so the weirdness of the language in part stems from the translator's desire to kind of capture that kind of ancient cadence to the language. So don't skip that part. Don't skip that part. That's part of the ritual. That's part of the, it's like the way that you and I talk normally is different than the way a priest talks at mass, right? When he's doing the liturgy. So think of epic poetry as a kind of semi-liturgical language that is meant to formalize the excellent and formalize the sacred. So if you have any questions, let me know. And until then, cheers. If you want, you can watch my normal podcast, I suppose. But anyway, have a great one.